I would like to introduce our first presenter, Mr. Ernesto Ballesteros. Mr. Ballesteros serves as the Cybersecurity State Coordinator, the CSC for the state of Texas at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in Region 6. As the CSC for the state of Texas, his role is to build strategic public and private sector relationships in Texas to facilitate and develop and maintenance of secure and resilient infrastructure. Prior to joining CISA, Mr. Ballesteros served the great state of Texas at the Department of Information Resources as the state cybersecurity coordinator and chairman of the Texas Cybersecurity Council. Please welcome Mr. Ballesteros.
Folks, it's nice to meet everybody. Let's give it up for our hosts here at TCEQ. These guys have been fantastic. Mason, gentleman, the scholar, been working also with Letty. These are fine folks. It's an absolute honor to get an opportunity to address you guys today and really bring some awareness briefly about some actionable things that you can do to start protecting your critical services so that you can continue to serve this great state and provide water for my family, your family, and your friends as well. So I'm Ernesto Ballesteros, the State Cybersecurity Coordinator for Texas at the federal level. There is one for the state level. That's my colleague, Tony Sauerhouse at the Department of Information Resources. I don't know if you're familiar with DIR, fantastic state agency that oversees cybersecurity matters for the state of Texas, right here in Austin. So I now work for CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It rolls right off the tongue. So CISA, if you don't know CISA, you probably know DHS. Everybody knows DHS after 9/11, through the Patriot Act. DHS is a very large federal civilian executive branch agency, and CISA, it falls under DHS. Our mission, it's right up there on the screen, but I will tell you this, in plain language, quite frankly, it's to understand and manage risk to our nation's critical infrastructure sectors and the national critical functions that you all definitely contribute to. And I know that, I'm probably preaching to the choir here on national critical functions and national critical infrastructure sector, but water and wastewater, as you can imagine, is certainly part of those 16 critical infrastructure sectors that came out of it was Presidential Policy Directive 21. Oh, that was probably way back in 2014. If you're familiar with FEMA, you're familiar with DHS and you're familiar with the work of CISA as well. Now, the work that we do engage in, believe it or not, even though cybersecurity is right there in the first word in the title, it goes beyond that. We engage, of course, everything that we do is through partnership development. Believe me, it's not lost on me the value proposition of creating public-private partnerships. We know that most folks that are in these 16 critical infrastructure sectors, including water and wastewater, by and large, are owned and operated by the private sector. And so we work with the public and the private sector. We work primarily, all organizations, I would say all people in this life, have to have a focus, and we do have a focus, and our focus is on those 16 critical infrastructure sectors that, again, help produce those national critical functions, which, quite frankly, without them functioning, delivering these services, whether it's water, electricity, critical manufacturing, information technology, telecommunications. Without that, we can't really provide for the safety, security, and economic prosperity of our country. Certainly, we wouldn't be able to do it even down, to the local level. And so we work with our partners. We work with our partners in these 16 sectors, and we do so on a voluntary basis. Now, I did hear that FEMA was mentioned earlier and talked about Region 6. We operate under the same framework. So CISA, believe it or not, we're not just in DC. I mean, that's where our headquarters is, but we are divided across 6 different regions across the country. We are in Region 6, and our regional offices are located in Dallas. So with Region 6, New Mexico, that's Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. I know that most of you folks here are from Texas, and I'm the state cybersecurity coordinator for Texas. My job is primarily to serve as the principal point of contact for non-federal entities. That's public and private, just non-federal, includes the state, local, territorial, and tribal, to engage the federal government on preparing for and managing and responding to cyber incidents. I do a whole host of other things, but that's my primary emphasis. There's one in every state, but there are many cybersecurity advisors. How many of you guys have worked with a cybersecurity advisor before? Awesome. I see one hand. I can't wait to work with all of you. So, so what do cybersecurity advisors do? We have dispersed across the state, through these 10 different regions. We have protective or physical security experts. We have chemical security inspectors. They're experts. That's the one part that is enforcement. Cybersecurity is not, that's not the case. We do have experts, and when I say experts, by and large, I mean, under the Daubert standard, you can drag us up into court, and whether by education, skill, or training, or some combination thereof, we can provide expert testimony. So as cybersecurity advisors, we're out there in the field, and we're here. I'm with the federal government. I'm here to help. And I know that's maybe a joke that doesn't always go over very well, but I told it anyway. So no, we really are, though. We're here to help, and we provide advice. We provide counsel on matters of cybersecurity. What does that look like? Doing assessments, cybersecurity assessments, looking at your policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, looking at your controls, looking at your practices, helping you understand your risk, but also manage your risk. We engage in education, awareness, strategic messaging, outreach, anything that we have to do, that we're allowed to do, in order to provide for that safety, security, and economic prosperity when it comes to cybersecurity matters and the critical infrastructure sectors, we do. Now, this is just a snapshot of some of the resources that we can provide to you. And then after this, I'm going to get into really the meat and potatoes of today's discussion. So here on the screen, just a snapshot. We can talk about this later if we set up a briefing, and I would love to do that. But we perform a number of assessments. So we can look at your information or cybersecurity program, identify gaps, identify opportunities for improvement, identify strengths, things that you're doing well, help you understand and manage your risk. We also perform a number of technical cybersecurity assessments. These are very expensive, and we know that most organizations, whether they're state or local or even private, cybersecurity assessments are quite expensive, as you probably know. We provide these at no cost because, quite frankly, again, you as the taxpayer, you have paid for them already. Now, really, for the main thrust of today's discussion, I really want to just raise awareness about the Shields Up campaign that we have. How many of you guys have heard of Shields Up? Okay, today you can say, you'll be able to raise your hand the next time you're asked about that. What is Shields Up? So Shields Up is, it's very simple. It is an awareness campaign that provides actionable information, guidelines, and access to resources at no cost for you to really address the dramatic uptick in risk of cyber attacks on national critical infrastructure as a consequence of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. So today's risk landscape, I know you're facing myriad risks, or threats rather. Threats are, again, they're either events or occurrences, just matters of fact that could potentially disrupt your ability to provide those critical services that you provide. Water, the safety and security of your water. So what is information or cybersecurity? What we're talking about here is really providing for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your organization's ability to deliver its critical services and accomplish its mission. Your organization relies on people, it relies on technology, that includes both hardware and software. It requires heavy dependence on information. And then also the facilities that you operate out of. All of those things can be compromised to some degree through different types of threat actors. So when we're talking about providing for information or cybersecurity, we're talking about achieving these three high-level goals here. Again, the confidentiality or availability of your information resources, really all assets that you need in order to deliver your critical services. Again, the threats are myriad, but you can more or less break them out into two categories. Those that are human-based, there's some sort of necessary mens rea, some sort of act, there's some intention or negligence on the part of a human being that causes some sort of a compromise of your confidentiality, integrity, or availability, or your ability to deliver your critical services. Or you have those that are naturally occurring, fires, floods, hurricanes, so on and so forth. We've got them all here in Texas. Threat actors. It's important that you are cognizant and somewhat aware of the different types of threat actors that are out there. Not to that you're going to go out and try to pursue them and investigate what they're doing, but really to protect yourself and be aware that they do exist and they do in fact want to compromise your networks. So we've got threat actors that range, really across the board in terms of motivation or even capabilities. And the ones I'm going to focus on today are your insider threats and your state actors. Have you guys ever heard of the insider threat? Are there any insider threats in the room today? We are all insider threats. Potentially, we are an insider threat because you don't have to act intentionally, right, to cause damage to your organization. You forget a tablecloth, you hit the wrong button, so on and so forth. Now, critical services, the delivery of them compromised in some way. Then you can't accomplish your mission. Now, with the state actors, we're seriously concerned with the state actors because, their intentions are pretty clear. They want to advance their own interests of the state that they're sponsored by. But what's pretty significant about a state actor is that, typically speaking, they are very well funded and very well resourced and very, very capable. And the problem with cybercrime or cyber warfare, God forbid, that there's this whole issue of attribution. Attribution is very difficult, it turns out, to actually achieve when somebody's committing some sort of an act on a computer. I mean, how do you know at the end of the day that this is actually coming from that particular person? You don't know. So let's not be worried about that right now. Let's be more worried about protecting ourselves. How do we protect ourselves? So I'm going to go over 5 high-level actionable steps that we're recommending organizations to engage in. Normally, I would spend a little bit more time on this, but I want to get you guys to the nitty-gritty here and really start getting into these 5 high-level actions, these recommendations that we're hoping you guys consider, and providing these resources, links to the resources. So, near-term actions that you can adopt to start adopting, sounds a little redundant there, but adopting a heightened cybersecurity posture for your organization to protect your ability to serve the public, to serve your customers. Okay, so we're going to start off with minimizing attack surface. To that, we're speaking about reducing the likelihood of a damaging cyber intrusion, starting with your perimeter. And then we'll move over to monitor and protect your network. So, standing up a capability to actually observe and detect what's happening in your network and to determine when something unauthorized or potentially malicious is occurring. Third, going on to incident response. If you don't have a plan, we can help you develop a plan. We have resources that you can help yourself develop a plan. I don't know if you caught that on that snapshot of regional and national resources, but we do in fact offer workshops. One of those workshops is for developing a cyber incident management plan. How many of you folks have a cyber incident management plan? I want to work with you if you don't. Or I at least want to arm you with the information to develop them. That's vitally critical. You will see how critical it is when your organization just doesn't work anymore because you get hit by a cyber attack. Hopefully that doesn't happen. All right, so minimizing your attack surface. So all organizations have a network. Just like in your building, you have some thresholds to get into a building. You got doors, you got windows. That's the way you get in. Maybe through the chimney if you're Santa Claus. Attackers look for doorways. They look for thresholds into your network. They're going to look at your internet-facing devices. Web servers, web applications, those kinds of things. Anything that an attacker can see from the outside, I'm going in and out. They will check to see whether or not they can jiggle the door handle and get inside. So in other words, they're going to look at those systems that are internet facing. They're going to determine whether or not they're vulnerable and, as a consequence, exploitable, so that they can gain unauthorized access and do whatever it is they intend to do once they're into your network, okay? So what can you do to mitigate the risk of that, to lower the risk of that? Well, number one, start using multi-factor authentication on, if you can, all of your devices. Everybody here knows what multi-factor authentication is, right? I have something I know, something I do, something I am, right? Most of the time we just use a username and password, but if we add multiple layers of authentication, maybe a token on top of that, a one-time password, so on and so forth, with each layer, we become more secure. It's much more difficult to gain unauthorized access by merely guessing or reusing somebody's credentials. You have to actually have those other methods of authentication. So, enforce strong password policy across organizations. So just don't rely on multi-factor authentication, but also, enforce a strong password or complex password policy. We have a whole list of bad practices, and by the way, you're going to have access to the slide deck. These link to a number of resources, but you can always contact me. If you can, stop using software that's out of date. If it's out of date, that means it's no longer supported. If it's no longer supported, well, let me just ask you this. Why do you think these vendors, for the most part, release these updates? Is it because they want to give you new features for free? Most likely not, right? Usually there's some sort of a vulnerability that's been discovered, and that vulnerability can be exploited. If it's on an internet-facing device, that means anyone that has your IP address can try to get in there. They will try to exploit it. By the way, we also have a whole list of vulnerabilities that we know of that are actively being exploited. So in other words, there is a corresponding method for exploiting that vulnerability that we know of. Take a look at that vulnerability list, hand that off to your IT folks, and have them start prioritizing their remediations on those vulnerabilities first, especially for their internet-facing devices. Lock your doors, lock your windows. System hardening. It's fun to play Angry Birds or Candy Crush, but it probably doesn't belong on your system. If you have things that are running on your system that just have no legitimate business purpose, take those off. Because the more things you have on your system, the more opportunities you have, really are creating to create vulnerabilities that can be exploited and allow for that system to be compromised, okay? So, harden those systems. Remove unnecessary ports, services, accounts, software, so on and so forth. You can even, disable physical ports, USB drives, those types of things. All right, okay. Cyber hygiene services. So I talked about vulnerabilities. Well, how do we know if we have vulnerabilities? So in IT, we perform these things called vulnerability scans. They're carefully crafted packets that go to your system, and they can determine whether or not that system is either misconfigured or it has some sort of a software package on there that is out of date and exploitable, okay, or vulnerable anyway. So we do that. We have a service, again, free of charge, no cost, very easy to set up. Once you set it up, it runs in perpetuity. And we can tell you whether or not your systems that are internet-facing, that the attackers can see from the outside, are in fact vulnerable. We don't just tell you, by the way, they're vulnerable, we also tell you how to fix that vulnerability. We provide you with steps and recommendations on how to address those vulnerabilities. And we also perform that service for web applications. Again, all internet-facing, these are the things that the outsiders can see. But what happens if they're already in your network? So in our homes, or in the physical world, we can perceive all kinds of threats with the senses that we've been given, right? I can see somebody coming. I can see somebody going. I can see that there's a fire over there. But with cybersecurity or information technology, in your operating environment, you can't just readily observe events that are malicious, that are occurring in your network. You need to stand up a capability. The good thing is, these days, that capability is already built into your systems, all right? So your operating systems, we've got smart watches, we've got cell phones, we've got laptops, we've got servers, we've got routers, switches, firewalls, VPNs, you name it. All of these things make up our network. They all have the ability to log events, okay? So these events are the events that are occurring in our network that we otherwise can't perceive with the human eye, but you can if you enable logging. What is an event? An event's just a matter of fact. It could be somebody failing to log in, somebody successfully logging in. It could be somebody accessing a file, somebody modifying or deleting a file. It could be someone requesting a website. It could be any number of things, all these types of events that otherwise aren't perceivable with the human eye. You can do so by enabling logging. Well, once you get these logs, what do you have to do with these logs? You have to monitor the logs. You have to start looking into what's happening in your network. And you're going to have to stand up a capability to help you analyze and determine whether or not this makes sense in your network. If it doesn't make sense and it looks suspicious or it looks abnormal or it's unauthorized, it's something that goes against your policies, you might have what we call an incident. It rises to the level of incident, you're going to get into the next capability, your incident management plan. I notice most folks, I don't know, maybe you're shy, but you didn't raise your hand when I asked you if you have an incident management plan and an incident response capability. Why is it important to have an incident management plan and an incident response plan or a capability right now before an attack happens? Well, because you want to know what you have to do when the attack happens, and the attack's not going to happen when you're sitting around drinking hot cocoa. It's going to be at the most inopportune time, and it could potentially be absolutely catastrophic. I don't suppose anybody's going to raise their hand here, but have you ever experienced a ransomware incident? If you have, most folks, they describe life, right? After a ransomware, they go, well, this is what it was like, it's before ransomware and then after ransomware. It is catastrophic. So we talked about standing up the ability to detect events and analyze them. Well, now we have to figure out how we're going to respond, and if we have a formal capability, in other words, a plan, we can measure whether or not it's successful, either by testing it, or the other way of testing it is when a real incident actually does occur, and then you can figure out post-mortem or post-incident whether or not it was successful. So if you do not have a plan, there are resources. We also do workshops. I would be more than happy to do a workshop for your organization. We can get a couple of you guys in the room and we can start to develop plans. If you do have a plan, we can exercise that for you. How many of you do tabletop exercises? You're probably familiar with tabletop exercises. We have tabletop exercises that are physical in nature, cyber in nature, cyber physical in nature. We have tabletop exercises in a box that you can just use on your own if you want to self-facilitate. I think it's always a good idea to have CISA come out and facilitate. Number one, it's free, but number two, you're going to get an independent set of eyes on how you're actually performing, and we can develop an after-action report for you. And the good thing about that, again, it's independent. When you run these things by yourself, you usually have a tendency to kind of sometimes, subconsciously maybe go easy on yourself. Not that we're going to go hard on you, but we want to help you. You're not held responsible to the findings or recommendations that we produce, but we want you, again, to accomplish your mission, which is the same as ours, and that's to understand and to manage your risks. So there are a number of resources here. If you don't already have an incident response plan, take a look at those when you get a chance. Now, I should really put step 4 before step 3, but step 4 is very closely related to having that incident management capability, and that's developing some degree of operational resilience. So operational resilience, for the most part, and this is kind of an academic interpretation of it, but it's a whole lot like information security or cybersecurity. You have these critical services, you have people, technology, facilities, and information that produce those critical services and help you accomplish your mission. Well, you need to have some way of protecting those assets so that you can accomplish your mission. So you've got to protect and you've got to sustain these services. That's what achieving operational resilience, really aspirational, means. But what does that entail for you? A whole host of things. But for right now, in the near term, long term we can talk about other things, but in the near term, first start out, figure out what your critical service is. For the most of you folks, it's going to be water related. Okay, whether it's cleaning water, supplying water, delivering water, it's going to be water related. Because if you can't produce or deliver that critical service, you're out of business. You're out of your mission failed, right? And if it's down for too long, it's definitely mission failed. You're going to maybe go into a whole other business later. And so what we're finding is that attackers, they're going to go after your assets. So know what your assets are. Get a good inventory of those assets that are absolutely mission critical in order for you to deliver one or many critical services. Rank order those critical services. Work backwards and go, what people, technology, information, and facilities do I need? Inventory those. Put protections around those assets. Create redundancy of those assets. So if you're talking about technology, hardware, software, if you ever experience a catastrophic cyber incident, or let's just say not even a cyber incident, if your building burns to the ground and your data centers went in there, what are you going to have to do in order to get back up? You're going to have to go off-site, right? So do you want to rebuild everything from scratch, from memory? Yeah, that knowledge is going to be difficult to come by because you've seen one network, you've seen one network. You haven't seen them all. They're all different. And so you want to have backups of not only your hardware and software, but the configurations of those hardware and software so that you just re-image the machines when you go off-site. You want to minimize the amount of downtime. You have a maximum tolerable downtime before you just go out of business. And in this case, folks are relying on you. Your kids are relying on you, my kids are relying on you, your neighbors are relying on you, and so this is vitally important for you folks in the room to take heed here. We're here to help. We don't compel, but I would love to work with you. So have those backups, have an inventory of what you need to protect, have those backups ready, and have a plan. Run through that plan before an incident actually does occur. Now, last thing here, and I don't want to get in front of you guys and your break, because I know how that goes. We are asking folks to lower their threshold for reporting suspicious or realized incidents, okay? Reporting to who? Of course, we want you to report to us. How does that help us? That helps us understand what the problems are so we can share the solution with you and in turn share the solution with other folks that are likewise situated and may potentially be impacted by an incident you are experiencing right now. So share with us, sharing with our colleagues at the FBI. CISA is not law enforcement, FBI is law enforcement. Also sharing with our state. The Texas Department of Information Resources. They also provide very similar services at a state level in the state of Texas. Great organization, I used to work there. Working with your regulators. You may have a duty to report, okay? But for us, we're asking you lower your threshold during this time of heightened risk because we want to be able to mitigate the damages and address the issues as soon as possible. Okay, so reporting incidents, reporting phishing, reporting malware. We have a number of different reporting capabilities. If you discover vulnerabilities in a vendor's software, you can report those to us, and we can coordinate with the vendor to come up with a timeline and a scheduled release on when that vulnerability is going to be disclosed to the public. We certainly want that information to be disclosed to the public before the vendor has a solution ready, right? And so we also provide that service. Now, information sharing, the value proposition of information sharing cannot be understated. Well, overstated, I guess I should say. It's super important, in other words. Sharing what kind of information? Threats, threat indicators, things that you should be looking for in your operating environment, indicators of compromise, solutions to these problems, solutions to cyber incidents, best practices, defensive measures. We have a system for doing that. We actually have many systems. How many of you all are members of the MSISAC? Or any information sharing or analysis center in ISAL, I implore you to do so. We've got one in the state. I was very fortunate to help stand that up. It's the Texas ISAL under DIR. We have the MSISAC. You have CISA's automated indicator sharing system. And there are a number of industry-specific ISACs and ISALs. I'm positive that there's one for water. All right, remain vigilant. I know you will, but our next steps, please, we want to partner with you. We don't compel anyone. And even when you do partner with us, you're not compelled to take any of our advice, which is great because I'm finally in a position where I can give folks advice. I'm not responsible whether or not they take it, but I will try my best to make a persuasive argument. But not just make an argument, but put you in a position where I provide you with resources where you can actually solve the problems we discover together. Please reach out to us. You can contact me directly. You're going to have my contact information here. It's also going to be on these slides. And folks, that is my time. I want to thank you all. Please give it up for our hosts again, TCQ, fantastic folks. You guys are doing great work for Texans, and I thank you for your time.